Hey, if you like Journey or are kind of interested in the Journey story, the history of the band, and I think you'll enjoy this video that I have, this thing that I have to share with you today. I spent a lot of time just doing research, just searching on different words and terms and names and things to just kind of see what comes up, to just have things to share in some of these videos. And because it just fascinates me and I have so much fun finding these things. And I was doing some searches on the word supergroup, seeing what would come up and looking for articles related to that. And I came across this article that said Rock's Next Supergroup. I thought, okay, this is going to be interesting. And it turns out that this article is about the band Journey. And it was from the South Bend Tribune, May 27th, 1979. Now, so I had to start reading this because I'm fascinated. I actually was a huge fan of the band Journey. I was too young when they really hit, when they really hit initially back in kind of the late 70s. The first concert I ever went to was in 1982, seeing Journey on the Escape tour. Now, by the time 1982 had rolled around, they'd been through so many changes, but Escape, of course, that was kind of the pinnacle, in my opinion, of their career. And not just my opinion, I think anybody would probably have to agree with that. That's really where they came of age. And, Jonathan Cain had just joined the band, and that's when they just hit. Now, it's not to say they didn't have great stuff before that, because they really did. And when Gregg Rollie was part of the group, but Escape is when they became this kind of international phenomenon. So what this is in 1979. This is after the second album with Steve Perry. Now, just to put in perspective, the way this worked was Gregg Rollie and Neil Schon had been in the band Santana. And Gregg Rollie had been the lead singer for Santana, I think, for like the first 4 Santana albums. I mean, he was one of the guys that formed the band Santana. And then he and Neil Schon left Santana. Neil Schon joined Santana as a kid because Carlos Santana was so impressed with him as a guitar player. So then he was in Santana's band. They left to go form this new group called Journey. And they put out 3 albums, and they just didn't go anywhere. And then their manager showed up one day and said, you're going to have a new singer, and this is the guy, and it's Steve Perry. And then Steve Perry joins the band, and they put out an album in 1978 called Infinity. And you'd be familiar with it. One of the first big hits was called Lights. When the lights go down in the city. That was Steve Perry comes in, and he and Neil Schon, boom, just knock it out of the park right off the bat. Put that song out. And then the song Wheel in the Sky, which everybody's heard. Wheel in the sky keeps on turning, don't know where I'll be tomorrow. And a great tune. And that's on that album. And then the other one was Feeling That Way. Are you feeling that way too? Anyway, and then that one, Gregg Rollie still sang a lot of the leads on that. And then every time you hear that song, it goes into the song Anytime. Anyway, that was the first album. When Steve Perry joined, that was what they put out. It was just incredible. Well, then they really started taking off. Well, then the next album they put out was in 1979, and that's where we find this article. And that was the album Evolution. And that one was the one that had Lovin' Touchin' Squeezin', which is just an awesome song. I remember I used to love these songs so much. And then the song Just the Same Way. That's the same way she loves you. That's the same way she loves you. Remember those tunes. Anyway, I'm just singing them for you in case you don't remember. And I don't know if that helps you remember if I'm actually doing it, but that's where we are right here. And it was interesting because this person that wrote this article then has this title, Rock's Next Supergroup with a question mark. Kind of like this person could see where this was going. And really, ultimately, they really became that. And they were a supergroup in another way too, because all the guys in the band were kind of veterans anyway. I mean, these people had been around, and I mean, just Gregg Rollie and Neil Schon alone, they'd been part of Santana. Steve Perry really, when he came in the band at that point, was really the only one that wasn't kind of a semi-famous veteran musician. But he was that ingredient. So anyway, I think you'll find this interesting as he talks about, it has this kind of interview and it has some quotes from some of the guys, and I think you'll find this fascinating. So anyway, South Bend Tribune, May 27, 1979, page 37. Rock's Next Supergroup? For the band Journey, evolution means a lot more than just the title of its latest album. Journey itself is in a process of evolution that is taking a pleasant young group of musicians from relative obscurity and turning them into a modern-day rock and roll supergroup. Although Journey's efforts began some 5 albums ago, it wasn't until the group's 4th album, Infinity, released in 1977, that this fledgling band made its first serious impression on the music industry. I think that's wrong. I don't think it was released in 77. I'm pretty sure it was released right at the beginning of 1978. But either way, not a big deal there. But anyway, so Infinity, even though Journey had 3 albums, Infinity was the first one with Steve Perry, and that's when they started moving. Utilizing a list of well-written melodies, the finest recording and mixing techniques available, and the addition of singer Steve Perry to the band, Journey earned its first platinum album and served as a launching pad to worldwide exposure. Until Infinity, we sounded all right, recalls keyboardist Gregg Rollie, but we were lacking the vocal dynamics that Steve has given us. Now, so that's a quote from Gregg Rollie, saying we were lacking the vocal dynamics that Steve has given us. That sounds really nice, but I don't know that Gregg was really all that happy with it. And when you listen to interviews with him later, when he quit the band, you get the impression that some of it had to do with the fact that he'd been kind of pushed out of the way a little bit. When Steve Perry came in, because Gregg Rollie considers himself a lead singer. He'd been the lead singer for Santana, and Santana was a big deal, right? And the song Black Magic Woman, got a black magic woman, Steve from Santana, that's Gregg Rollie singing that. So he's a lead singer, keyboard player. And, he'd had all those albums with Santana, and now he's got 3 albums with Journey, even though they hadn't done well. He's still a lead singer. And then this new kid comes in, Steve Perry, who doesn't have nearly the background that Gregg Rollie does, and is just kind of pushing him out of the way. And that's not going to sit well. And I think over time, even though Gregg's being really nice about it here in this quote, there is that little bit of, and sadly, Steve Perry just really was that good. He just a once-in-a-lifetime voice. And Gregg, you're a great singer, but let's be honest, Steve Perry, I know he's a nobody, but he really did, and as Gregg said it here, there was a vocal dynamic that Steve handed them. Okay, there have been some growing pains during Journey's evolution. The departure of drummer Ainsley Dunsbar undoubtedly left some fans wondering if the band could overcome the loss of such a gifted musician. Journey's new percussionist Steve Smith convincingly laid all those fears to rest during Journey's concert at Notre Dame last Tuesday evening. So Ainsley Dunsbar was the drummer on Infinity when Steve Perry was first there, but then he was gone after that, and then that's when Steve Smith came in and joined the band. Quote, Ainsley just wasn't happy with the tight business structure of the band, stated the group's stage manager. The change had to be made, and we all feel that Steve is performing every bit as well. And in the Steve he's referring to there is Steve Smith, not Steve Perry, obviously. Smith's credentials are impressive. Before Journey, he had toured with Ronnie Montrose and Jean-Luc Ponty. Journey's progress from its first visit to South Bend over a year ago was quite evident. The band's performance was one of the most energetic, well-mixed, and entertaining shows to have taken place at the ACC in many months. Quote, we work hard at it, grinned Pat Morrell, Journey road manager, a Yul Brynner lookalike. We probably work harder at being successful than any other band I can think of, unquote. And that's pretty interesting that that they're getting a quote from the road manager. instead of a band member. I don't know, just kind of I thought that was kind of funny. That's a candidate for Understatement of the Year. Aside from the group's obvious musical talents, a great deal of Journey's success to date lies in the band members' uncommon benevolence toward the press and the public. And the truth is, Steve Perry, not only was he a great singer, he was a great showman. If you ever saw Journey in concert with Steve Perry, I saw them twice with Steve Perry. I saw him on the Escape Tour, and then I saw him on Raised on Radio. And I can't explain. I was in high school. I was a young guy when on the Raised on Radio one, or even younger with Escape, obviously. But man, he just had this charisma. He just grabbed that audience. 18,000 people in McNichols Arena when I saw them, and he just had you. It was amazing what the guy had. Okay, unlike the do the show then run and hide attitude adopted by most touring bands, Journey literally throws itself at its public. Not only has the band been known to play benefits for crowds of only 300, they also perform as if their lives depended on it. Offstage, between the handshaking and mingling with just about anyone who cares to come by, you'd think the band was running for office. This openness is no doubt an ongoing nightmare for the security boys, but it is a price the band feels must be paid to gain a loyal following. And that's actually an interesting point, because when you put all this in perspective, even though they really did hit on Infinity, you have to remember that those first 3 albums did so poorly, they were in danger of losing the record contract and just kind of disappearing. And so they were doing a little bit of makeup at this point, like realizing how fragile their position was with those, because those first 3 albums. When Infinity comes out, they're working it. I mean, they know they have something great and they put out some great music, but they were in a position where they realized we have to work this to build that following at this point, or they were in danger of losing that record contract. Our public is where it's at, continued Morrill. Whether a reviewer from Rolling Stone or a 8th grade fan clubber, we treat everybody the same. If we can't get the people behind us, then what's the sense of it all? Apparently Journey's game plan is working. Starting with its performance as opening act for the Rolling Stones concert last summer at Soldier Field, Journey proceeded to stuff the Midwest rock audiences in its hip pocket and produced record attendance records at the Chicago Music Festival. And if you saw Journey opening for the Rolling Stones, I'm pointing to you right now, you watching this thing, if you saw Journey open for the Rolling Stones, we need to hear about it in the comments. I do. Please. We have the people that watch this channel are some of the most interesting people. And if you have not read the comments on some of these videos, especially those where people are leaving talking about the concerts they attended, you need to go back and read them. There's so many fascinating things. And I mean, we get so many great comments, and I would love to hear if you saw Journey opening up for the Rolling Stones. I mean, what an epic, interesting thing that would be. So please leave those comments if you happen to see that. More recently, or at the Chicago Music Festival. Anyway, more recently, Journey has completed a tour of Japan that left the fans in the stands clamoring for more. According to singer Steve Perry, more is already in the works. Even though our Evolution album is just getting started, it has already gone gold, 500,000 sales. And after we end our tour in August, we're going back into the studio to finish an album that we'd like to release at the first of the year. So the next album that they would put out after Evolution was, well, it's not the next album. I mean, they put out kind of a best of from the first 3 albums. I think it was called Beginnings or something. But the next real studio album that they'd put out would be the album Departure. And Departure was, these first 2 were great. Departure amped it up. I mean, Departure was so great. It was the one that had it Any Way You Want, Any Way You Want, if that's the way you need it, anyway. Just, that was such an awesome song. And then they had this song called Walks Like a Lady that was just incredible. Good Morning Girl, I loved. Someday Soon, ooh, there'll be a better place, which was just awesome. That was one of my favorites. They had another song called People and Places, Where Were You? Where Were You? Anyway, Departure was a great album. But unfortunately, that was really the last one that we would see Gregg Rollie on. And I say these things because it technically wasn't, but because they have other things. They had an album called Dream After Dream. They put out a live album called Captured, but not technically, but really the last album that Gregg Rollie would be on would be that Departure. That's the one everybody would know as his last album. And then that's when he left. Jonathan Cain came in, who was with the Babies, and then Escape. That's what led to Escape coming out. Anyway, but I'm sure he's probably he has to be referring to the album Departure when he says that's the next one they're working on. And if you are considering purchasing a Journey album, this reviewer would suggest Infinity as your best introduction to the band. Infinity could be best described as part one of a two-part thriller, with Evolution being the continuation. Anyway, those are the two we've been talking about here. Along with Perry, Smith, and Rollie, the group is rounded out by members Neil Schon on guitar and bassist Ross Valory. Together, the five comprise a group that could very easily reach the status of the Eagles, Bob Seger, or Crosby, Stills, and Nash. And that was what the headline of this article was all about. This guy's looking at where they are after these two albums with Steve Perry, and he's saying, these guys actually have what it takes to hit that level of superstardom. And I made a video, several years ago, where I was talking about bands destroying their legacy. And he's right that if Journey would have hung it up after, Frontiers, Race on Radio, I don't know, they would have moved into legend status. But instead, Steve Perry leaves, and they start bringing in all these other singers, and who's in the band now. And I mean, it just, even Raised on Radio, where Steve Perry came in and he started, because he kicked out Ross Valory and Steve Smith, he kicked him out of the band, started wielding this power. So now the band, then when you buy Raised on Radio and you look inside, now the band is 3 people. And when bands start doing that, where you can't even keep track of who's in the group, you start really, really damaging your legacy. And Journey, they were, and the truth is, if Steve Perry got back together with Journey today, they could go on a tour and fill up pretty much any place they wanted to fill. I think I would go out of my way to go see that. Okay, anyway. And although Journey members represent past experience with bands like Santana, Steve Miller, or Jean-Luc Ponty, Steve Miller, it was Ross Valory that was the one that had played with the Steve Miller Band. Journey's sound is strictly its own. One overall trademark is the amazing vocal line. Steve Perry is one of the premier vocalists of the day. And just like I was saying a little while ago, he was a singularly unique talent. There just wasn't anybody like him. And I don't know that he kind of sits in his own category. And he really is, the guys didn't like it in the group. Matter of fact, when Steve Perry left the band, I saw an interview with Neil Schon where he said there was a Journey before Steve Perry and there'll be a Journey after Steve Perry. And then they proceeded to go get a laundry list of singers that all sounded like Steve Perry, which tells me there really won't be a band without Steve Perry, after Steve Perry, because all you're doing is trying to just find people that sound just like him. So anyway, he was that unique and that special as a singer and as a performer. Aside from occasional stints in the recording studio, Journey plans to keep touring until, as Morrell puts it, who knows when. That's what this business is all about, playing to the people, and that's all we really care to do. Coming from the tour manager? Well, whatever. Kind of interesting. I think that's what they said he was. And then, of course, as part of the article, they have the picture of the guys. Man, they looked so cool back then. So you got Ross Valory there on the far left, Steve Perry, and then there's Gregg Rollie right in the middle, Neil Schon, and then Steve Smith And this again was Evolution was the first album that Steve Smith was on. Anyway, just the story of Journey is such a fascinating one, you know, all the way from Santana all the way until the whole Raised on Radio thing, and Steve Perry, you know, he comes into the band, and the truth is, it didn't take him long to realize that the reason the band was succeeding was because of him. And so I don't know if it went to his head or whatever, but he did start kind of taking control of things. And then there's the power dynamic between him and Gregg Rollie and Neil Schon, because they're the ones that started the band, but Steve Perry's the one that's making the band famous. And then Gregg leaves, and then when Jonathan Cain comes in, then he and Steve Perry are writing the hits. And Neil Schon is he's still the guy that started the band, and he's kind of finding himself, like the song Open Arms. Neil Schon didn't really want that song on the album, but Steve and Jonathan Cain, it was a Jonathan Cain song, but he and Steve Perry put this thing together, so they put it at the very, 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 very last track of the album Escape, and it ends up becoming their biggest hit. And which, of course, is not going to sit well with Neil Schon, who doesn't really like that direction. And anyway, it's these bands and all this stuff. It's so interesting. I just love it. Anyway, I hope you enjoy this stuff too. If you made it all the way to this point in the video, then you must also find this stuff interesting. Anyway, so please follow the channel if you're not following the channel already. Like the video. If you saw any of these concerts, if you have any thoughts about Journey, especially these early days when it was Gregg Rollie and Steve Perry, because the truth is, man, those guys, their voices together were so great. It was so great. It was so awesome when those two guys were in the band together. That sound that they were doing was awesome. Loved it. So anyway, I'd love to get your feedback on that too. What your thoughts are on that, and like the video, please like the video, subscribe, etc., etc. All right, anyway, with that, have yourself a fantastic day.